Hello, I'm Petra Roos, and in this video we'll be looking at hierarchical processing, what are executive functions, why they're important to learning, and how they're related to ADHD. So what's hierarchical processing? Hierarchical processing is one of the two natural tendencies that the brain uses for taking information and stimulus from the outside world and making sense of it. So how does hierarchical processing work? Well, it can work in one of two ways. The first is referred to as bottom-up processing. This is where environmental stimulus are first garnered through what are generally considered the lower mechanisms of the brain. Some people refer to this as the reptilian brain. These lower parts of the brain are where basic sensory information like sight, sound, touch are garnered. Then processing moves up to the level of perception, where it is integrated with emotion, to where finally memory is invoked and cognition and planning can happen. Another way of thinking about this is in Deborah Lovrich states in her article, Classroom Applications of Top-Down and Bottom-Up Processing. Bottom-up processing is stimulus-driven. The second mechanism is known as top-down. And top-down processing, as you can imagine, sort of follows the reversed route, right? So this is where information is garnered by the higher cognitive centers of the brain, which the prefrontal cortex right here is but one. It is where info is processed in regards to previous knowledge and experience. Then it follows down through memory, perception, and lastly, sensation. So how can these different processing methods account for differences in learning? Interestingly enough, as mentioned by Ms. Deborah Lovrich in the aforementioned article above, both ways of processing are found among everyone and are necessary for everyone. Although people can have a preference to either stimulus-driven bottom-up processing or top-down processing that focuses on previous knowledge, experience, and intention. Both are valid and both have certain strengths and weaknesses, okay? So let's take a specific skill, such as reading, to illustrate sort of the differences between the two and how these processing styles might look like. So someone who favored a bottom-up processing would sort of start with the sensory information. They'd look at the word and they sort of discern its various arrangements of sounds and letters. And then processing would move up in the brain to where meaning would then be applied. There's an advantage to this method in that you wait until you have all the salient details before making conclusions. However, it can also be pretty process heavy and slow. Nor is it a particularly robust platform for making inferences and rich connections with other ideas. If you favor sort of a top-down method of reading, then you would start with the processing the word by its component, not by its component pieces rather, but by connecting its meaning to words and ideas that you already know. Now, this modality can lead you to missing salient details. For example, we've probably all had this situation where we answer a question on the test before sort of reading it through and then getting it wrong. However, the main advantage in regards to reading of this process modality is it's speedy, because you don't need to parse out every word every single time, right? And it also is a good platform for creative thought, since meaning comes sort of from tying disparate ideas together. So this lends itself well to being able to come up with things that are new and novel. It also tends to lead itself to more intuitive thinking, because rather than being based sort of wholly on facts, it relies on general feelings based on experience and intentions. So a real-world manifestation of this in the classroom would be someone with a top-heavy thought pattern may not do so well on standardized tests, which require sort of a fair amount of attention to detail. However, when given a more free-form method of expression, such as essay writing, they may show a very complex and nuanced understanding of the material. There's evidence, as mentioned in a lecture given by Dr. Brian Hudson on March 14th, 2013 at Harvard University, that those with ADHD can have issues with both forms of processing because attention is a really complicated process, right? Attention issues can be witnessed with the bottom-up processing in that a person can't focus adequately on the stimulus or relevant details in the environment. I should also mention here that if you have problems with sussing out or focusing on the salient details in your environment, if there's problems in which the way the lower centers of the brain gain information, then your EF, or your executive functions rather, will likely suffer too. Because the high cognitive centers of the brain are also dependent upon receiving that information, right? If it's sort of more like a feedback loop or a checks and balance system. So if the information you get from the lower brain allows you to make sure that your plan of action is in line with the demands of the environment, because things will change. However, for the purpose of my talk, I'll be focusing more on top-down processing and the role that the prefrontal cortex performs as a vital part for both learning and attention, because it is central in the development of executive functions. And when there's issues with executive functions, which is dependent upon top-down processing primarily, we will see problems in inhibition and impulsivity. And it is these problems that are characteristics of those with ADHD. So I've mentioned them before, but let's start with what are executive functions and why are they important? What are thought of as generally the core or main executive functions, or now as that will be referred to as EF. The core main executive functions are inhibition control, working memory, and cognitive flexibility. Now, of course, they work together, but I would like to start with delineating them, breaking them out separately. So what they are, why they're important, and examples. So 3 important executive functions are, as I mentioned, working memory, inhibition control, and cognitive or mental flexibility. Working memory, generally speaking, is the capacity to hold and manipulate information in our heads over a short period of time. It allows for us to be able to keep a number of congruent pieces of information in our heads at once. This skill is essential for completing school tasks like reading. I mean, because you've got to be able to hold each word in your head long enough to be able to get the meaning of a sentence, right? It's also necessary to be able to understand and execute a series of steps or commands, as seen as math equations, or to be able to follow the requests or directions of a teacher. And then another everyday example is being able to remember a phone number long enough to dial it. I mean, I know that we all have smartphones now, but still. The second is cognitive or mental flexibility. This is the capacity to nimbly switch gears and adjust to changed demand, priorities, or perspectives is what enables us to apply different rules in different settings. So specifically, it is the ability to look at problems from different points of views and angles. It is the ability to sort of move ideas around in your head and to change them. To be able to play with them and bring sort of seemingly disparate ideas together. So really, another way of looking at cognitive flexibility is it is a cornerstone of creativity. On a more practical level, it's an important skill in being able to assess a problem. To not only be able to sort of look at it from the different viewpoint and angles, but to also be able to revise plans and to know when they aren't working and to be able to recognize mistakes and create another plan. And on a social level, it allows you to understand various social contexts and to change in those situations and to modulate your behavior accordingly. For example, you may be recounting or even griping about a situation to a coworker, but if your supervisor walks in, you're liable to change your tone a little bit, right? And inhibition control is the skill we use to master and filter out our thoughts and impulses so we can resist temptations, distractions, and habits, and to pause and think before we act. So specifically, inhibition control could arguably be the most important of the EF skills because it plays such a large role in learning and social interactions. There's also this one of the skills that is most lacking in those with ADHD. So as I said, it allows you to avoid distractions, persist at problem solving, control rash responses. In essence, it just helps you resist temptation, sort of think before you speak and, stay focused. And as stated by Dr. Adele Diamond in her article, Executive Functions, those who enter school with poor inhibition skills are really at a disadvantage scholastically. They'll have trouble with many basic school activities that require concentration, such as following directions. And they'll be less apt to think before answering, which makes taking turns and working in teams difficult. So as stated by Dr. Adele Diamond in the aforementioned article, Executive Functions, all the EF mentioned above are sort of essential, or rather the building blocks for performing the skills of problem solving, reasoning, and planning. So they need to work in concert. So let's take the concept of working on a group project to sort of illustrate this. In order to work together to solve a problem, you need memory, inhibition control, and cognitive flexibility. So the first challenge, of course, is sort of to identify both the current parameters of the project and the end goal, as well as sort of the various issues you're going to encounter when trying to reach that goal. So this requires working memory to keep in your head all the sort of various criteria for the project, mental flexibility to be able to sort of prioritize those criteria so that you can start thinking up solutions and constructing a plan. When the parameters of the project have sort of been sussed out, it's then time to sort of construct solutions. You'll need working memory to keep in your head everyone's ideas, impulse control to sort of block out various stimulus that are not relevant to the task at hand, and cognitive flexibility to sort of play with ideas and to judge their relevance and come up with useful or even alternate ideas or methods. And finally, you'll have to engage with your peers, where everyone will contribute their ideas. This is eventually where, ideally, sort of a synthesis is going to happen where the best ideas will be integrated. So when engaging with your peers, you'll need, again, to apply working memory to keep all the various, ideas of everyone's in your head, cognitive flexibility to ascertain their usefulness and, possibly change your point of view or even abandon it. And you will need, in order to communicate with them, impulse control and cognitive flexibility will have to be employed too, right? So you can have the patience to sort of listen and not blurt out your opinions or misjudge the social situation and say something inappropriate that could lead to offense either on their part or yours. So it can be argued that the main consistent thread, the thing that all these executive functions have in common, is the ability to self-regulate. In short, we use various EFs for self-regulation to attain goals. These skills allow you to have self-attention, to be aware of your actions. Self-restraint or inhibition control allows you to control your actions. Cognitive flexibility allows you to regulate your thoughts and use ideas. And when you're using working memory effectively, what you're also doing is self-regulating, because you're selectively maintaining focus on certain facts, and this helps guide your future actions. Okay? And those with ADHD have a lot of problems surrounding self-regulation, and so arguably have problems with executive function because the two are related. So the next reasonable question would be, how can we help those with ADHD compensate for weak EF skills and to build the ones that they have? Dr. Russell A. Barkley, in his YouTube video, who has championed the idea of ADHD as a problem with EF skills, has a few suggestions in regard to supporting those with the disorder. And his suggestions are basically ways to scaffold executive functions. 1, make instructions and timelines concrete. So since there are deficiencies in working memory, it's difficult to keep in mind details or plan for the future. So cues or reminders, like on Post-it notes, for example, are very beneficial because the person in question is going to have trouble keeping sort of various things they have to do in mind. And as such, are liable to, sort of be derailed by other things. So this can kind of help keep them on track and to not deviate from the task at hand. 2, break tasks into smaller pieces. So sort of related to making things concrete. If you sort of can parse out expectations and deadlines into smaller, easier to accomplish pieces, this can be really helpful. Because since planning skills are affected, if someone with ADHD is confronted with too large a project, it can become unmanageable quickly. And creating a plan for finishing the task at hand is likely, not to occur. 3, give pep talks with ready praise and instant reward systems. So again, the concept is time skewed. So doing something with sort of the possible idea of, future reward is probably not going to be a great motivator. So if you can break tasks down and sort of give an instant reward, you're likely to be more effective in motivating future actions. 4, have frequent breaks. So concentration is a very difficult task. So implementing frequent breaks sort of allows people to sort of refuel, right? 5, exercise. So there are many ways in which this is beneficial, and I'll get into some of those later on in the talk. However, this is yet another way to sort of stimulate the brain, and it allows for a person to have a much needed break. So some other ways to build EF skills are through exercise and meditation. Let's start with meditation. There are many scientific studies that show a benefit in both cognitive functions and mood when someone meditates. However, for the ease of explanation, let's put them into 3 main groups. As stated in Yin-Yang Tang's paper, short-term meditation training improves attention and self-regulation. One can divide the various kinds of meditation schools into sort of 3 main types. There are mental or mind training types that involve sort of control of thoughts, such as focusing on an object, paying attention to the present moment, concentration meditation, mantra, and mindfulness meditation, to name a few. And then there are body-focused techniques, such as body relaxation and breathing techniques and mental imagery. Then there are those types of meditation that sort of combine the two. The authors of the aforementioned paper thought that if you put these together, sort of the body and the mind technique, that this may help beginners because they don't have to sort of just focus solely on controlling their thoughts, which, as you may know, if you've tried before, it can be very, very difficult. This hypothesis was tested in a study using integrative body-mind training, or IBMT. This technique focuses primarily on body awareness and employs the use of breathing and mental imagery. So what the study specifically consisted of was there were 80 Chinese undergraduate students. 40 of them were in the control group, while the other 40 students did 20 minutes of IBMT over 5 days. The students in the meditation group showed short-term IBMT practice can influence the efficiency of executive attention. So as I'm sure you can see, if you have ADHD and your attention networks aren't working at peak capacity, that sort of engaging in a meditative practice like this could be very beneficial. So those with ADHD having something to do that requires sort of full-on concentration or activities that require stillness are probably not going to be particularly appealing, right? But as I have alluded to, and as the study above sort of has shown, that there are many different kinds of meditation that integrate movement. However, the study above did rely on a fair amount of outside guidance. So another method that can be proved useful and enjoyable is walking meditation. And it is something that you can use sort of to develop your concentration skills and can also be done at any time without any help from anyone but yourself. Yippee! So this is good. This is a good tool for sort of sharpening mind skills because it allows for concentrated focus. It's about how your body feels while you're walking. This is a tool you'll use in order to sort of allow for that single-minded concentration to occur. Thinking about walking, how each step feels and how your body responds can sort of help all the sort of activity going on in your brain. It can also help to sort of foster a certain kind of discipline over the mind. So here are some guidelines, although if you'd like to look them over yourselves, you can take a look at the website meditationoasis.com. So when you start your walking meditation, here are some logistics you may want to think about. First, make sure that you're not super rushed, right? That you don't want to have, you make sure you don't have it somewhere to be because you don't want sort of the stress of possibly being late to distract you. Likewise, you may not really want to combine this with other things since you don't want, like running errands, since you don't want that to distract from your focus. 2, make sure that you have comfortable shoes. Having uncomfy feet can most certainly be a distraction. So while it may be obvious, I figured it'd be worth mentioning, leave the super fab stilettos at home and stay with the dressing appropriately for the weather. So now that we've gone over the logistics, you're ready to begin your walk. So before you start, you're going to want to sort of stand still and sort of take a running inventory of how your body feels. Sort of take a deep breath, clear your mind of all those thoughts in your head, and now you're ready to walk. Just sort of think about how each step feels, how the ground sort of feels beneath your feet, how your feet feel in your shoes, how one foot goes in front of the other. And then maybe move your focus to how sort of your body is moving generally, like your hips, your back, your arms. Now, you may feel tempted to sort of allow your focus to, hey, look, a squirrel! I mean, you may want to try to look at the scenery. However, the point is to try to focus on one thing, walking. Not your deadline, not what's for dinner, not what your coworker said, not that cool TED Talk. Meh. This is about you and your body and how it's moving in space, okay? But having that been said, if and when that happens, like, no worries. This is hard stuff. It may seem simple, but focusing on one task fully can be a real challenge. So if your mind wanders, don't feel discouraged, don't get too judgy. Remember, effort is what will make you improve. So just getting out of the house and trying to do this means points for you, and you will get better at it. It's just a matter of practice. So if and when distraction does come up, just take a deep breath and refocus. Maybe your mind is getting too restless, so you can kind of switch it up a little, right? So instead of sort of taking a micro view, focusing on the individual movement of your body parts, maybe you can take a macro view and sort of focus on the general rhythm of your walking. Either way, keeping it body focused is the key. Exercise is also a great way to help strengthen attention and executive function skills. A great website to view for more information on this topic, and where I got the majority of my information, is sparklife.org. And there's a great TED Talk by Dr. John R. Rately, MD, that I would suggest as well. And I would suggest watching it in its entirety because it's really cool and will likely motivate you to get moving. Okay, so exercise is great not only because it helps get rid of excess energy, which is, no small thing. However, exercise also helps develop the parts of the brain that are responsible for attention. This includes the prefrontal cortex, which is one of the seats of executive functions. Something which, as we have already mentioned, is something that is lacking with those in ADHD. Another of the benefits of exercise is it releases a lot of very important neurotransmitters, such as norepinephrine, that helps with concentration, alertness, and energy. serotonin that helps with compulsions, obsessions, and memory. And these are the neurotransmitters that ADHD medication targets, actually. And lastly, it also helps produce dopamine, and this helps with pleasure, reward, and motivation and drive. As Dr. John J. Rately said, exercise is like taking a little Prozac and a little Adderall. And finally, exercise helps release BDNF, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And this is really cool. This is the protein that helps grow the cells in your brain and is released by aerobic exercise, as stated in the TED Talk by Dr. John R. Rately, MD, as well as the website Thought Medicine. So, when you exercise your body, you're also building your brain because the two are interconnected. So, the next time you think about skipping that workout because you're too busy, you might want to remember that what's good for your body is good for your brain, and it will also help with your overall well-being. Thanks for listening to my talk. Have a great day. Bye.